Well, welcome to another episode of Advertising Alpha. Today we have Sam Hill, who's the founder of Ecom CFO. Ecom CFO exclusively services 8 and 9 figure e-commerce brands. Their clients include top 15 Amazon sellers, and then I think a couple of Shark Tank brands as well. So it's really awesome to talk to you. This is like such an important topic, I think, today with all the kind of issues around inflation, and then overall just D2C brands getting hammered in terms of margins. And so, really excited to talk to you today and kind of get your insights. So welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Hal.
So we can hop right in. Really, the first question I have for you is what are the biggest financial mistakes that you see 8 figure D2C brands making? And then, like, what are the ways to kind of fix these mistakes? How do they remedy this?
Yeah. So one of the common mistakes that I've seen is e-commerce or D2C founders thinking that they're special. And this notion that e-commerce or D2C doesn't conform to the laws of business physics. And if at the end of the day, they're business owners. You and I are business owners, and there's so many key business fundamentals that you're going to find from the Warren Buffetts and the Charlie Mungers of the world, and even one of my favorite books, Nassim Taleb's Anti-Fragile. And so, how do I build an anti-fragile business that doesn't, rely on Meta as my single way to acquire customers? How do I diversify my supply chain so that I'm not held hostage by any one suppliers. Right? And so, for our businesses, as you run a marketing agency, it's the same. How am I not held hostage by one single source of talent or one single source of customer acquisition? We're all the same. It's just some of the mechanics within e-commerce are a little bit different. So that's one of the most common mistakes I see is just a general mindset. The other biggest mistake that I see is just a disregard for accounting. And because founders don't know anything about it or it's not their expertise, it always falls by the wayside. And instead, we focus on the fun dashboards and the sexy spreadsheets and the third-party Shopify apps. But really, at the end of the day, we should be continuing to build and exercise an accounting muscle to where you have investor-ready financials month in and month out. And you don't have to understand all of accounting, but you understand the basics of how your financials are compiled, what information you should or should not be getting from them, and how to make better and faster decisions. So I think those are two of the main ones. The third, one of the other biggest mistakes is I see this like negative downward spiral happening in a lot of the behavior of some of these businesses. And the downward spiral is I don't have a lot of cash. I try something new. It doesn't work. I have less cash now. And the amount of time and resources that I have to allocate to managing cash or managing my balance sheet or whatever it is takes me so far away from the things that I need to be focused on. And I'm working hard. I'm working a lot of hours, but I'm trying to I'm creating a payment plan for my suppliers, my contractors, and other parts of the business. I'm doing that on a daily basis. And that's taking hours of my bandwidth when I should be working on how am I going to acquire customers? How am I going to get great talent? How am I going to source my product? How am I going to thrive in this new environment, et cetera, et cetera. So those are really the three biggest problems. That's a little bit more philosophical than tactical, but I think every founder needs to hear that, including myself sometimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely makes sense. I want to kind of double click into the cash management side of things. Um, there's a couple issues that we've kind of ran into, and it's not necessarily related to cash, but I think it's like pretty closely connected. But one is just like how they're managing inventory and how they're kind of timing, when they're like restocking inventory, right? And a lot of times they don't actually have that much sophistication around inventory management. So we'll be working with them. We'll scale up on a certain product, is doing really well, and then they're out of stock. And they're like, well, we can't actually restock right now because we have to wait for all this like to basically get paid. And then we'll go buy, this new stock of inventory, and then we'll get it, repopulated, and you guys can run campaigns again. How does that kind of tie into this is like one point. And then the second point is like how can ecom founders be smarter about their effectively cash flow and like I guess like what would be a negative cash conversion cycle as opposed to some of them which I feel like kind of sit on positive cash conversion cycles. Like can you kind of speak to that a little bit? Because that's something we've definitely bumped into, but I'm not, that well educated on the topic. It's just something that we bump into where it's like, hey, we got to pause campaigns. And then they might be performing really well and we get frustrated because we're on a really good trend in terms of scaling and then everything needs to pause.
Again, business fundamentals. I think a lot of the challenges and problems that I see comes down to communication. Marketing wants to do something. Marketing is told to do something. Operations is told to do something else, and the two don't talk, or the two don't talk often enough. And so making sure that there's a dedicated meeting cadence with an agenda and that we're all looking at the same source of truth. So what are we looking at? Are we all collectively looking at the marketing campaign? Are we looking at the promotional calendar? Are we looking at inventory purchases that we expect to happen? Are we looking at historical demand? Are we looking at new products that I'm considering launching? Are we looking at the bundles that I'm thinking about putting together or certain tests that you want to do? Marketing should absolutely have that freedom to do all of those things, but the two departments just need to make sure that they stay in sync. So I think that's kind of layer one. And then layer two is from a financial perspective, do I have the cash to achieve what marketing and operations is going to do? So I think if we're thinking about a good, better, best, the better solution is making sure marketing and operations are talking. The best solution is to make sure that finance is included as well in the conversation. So when finance hears marketing, we see this huge opportunity, we can quadruple spend or, whatever you marketing people do. And then operations says, okay, great, I need to make this big order. Finance can go, well, do we have the cash to support that? If not, how am I going to do it? Am I going to finance it? Can I pull my line of credit? Does the owner have to write a check to the business? Or how can I get more creative with my order schedule? Can I place a smaller order on a weekly basis, or do I have to make this gigantic order all at one time to accomplish this initiative? So I think that's the dynamics at play between marketing ops and finance. And as long as the more in sync they are, the better. The methods, how they communicate, what they look at, the agenda is obviously highly dependent on the business and also, who's wearing the hat. The CEO could be wearing the marketing hat and the finance hat. They could be wearing the operations hat and the finance hat, or, some collection of the three. So just defining what those roles are and what should and shouldn't be accomplished in that meeting cadence is, I think, critical.
Awesome. So this next question is kind of related to that second layer that you just described, but how can a D2C brand think about cash flow and financing as they start scaling? Let's say, they're on that path from like 1 to 3 million, they're trying to get to 10. I know fundamentally the business really changes from like a finance perspective and they need to be much more sophisticated. And typically financing comes into play in a much bigger way. What do you have kind of a top level sketch, maybe a roadmap of how they should be thinking about getting more sophisticated from a finance perspective as they get to, let's say they start at 3 million and they're trying to get to 5, maybe they're trying to go from 5 to 10. What are those kind of key milestones and inflection points where they need to get much more sophisticated? What does that look like?
Hmm. I think the dirty secret is what we found is everybody wants the tool or the app that they can use or the AI thing that they can use to automatically manage cash flow. And I pray for the day that this tool becomes available and someone is probably screaming at me as they're listening this to be like, oh my God, it's this thing. And okay, great. Please email me. But let's just start simple in a spreadsheet. The mechanics don't really change if you're 110 or 100 million. At the end of the day, it's a 13-week cash flow or a 26-week cash flow. The number of weeks is completely arbitrary. The important part is that it's done on a weekly basis and that you have all of the correct inputs and you know what the outputs are. So the inputs are all of your 5 bank accounts, your PayPal account, any sort of receivables that you may have. And then the credit cards, what's your credit card limit? How much are you paying on the credit card for that particular week? And then, of course, your POs. How much do I need to pay this week? What checks need to go out the door right now? And then what does that look like over the next 13, 26, 84 weeks? Doesn't matter. Those are the fundamentals, and the fundamentals don't change. I think what we've seen is as a client gets larger in scale, they start opening up more bank accounts. They have 5 suppliers. So the structure and the mechanics of the sheet, whether it's a spreadsheet or not, get more complicated because there's just more variables. And so transitioning that from the owner can do it at less than 1 million because it's usually not that complicated. You have 1, maybe 2 suppliers, assuming that you're not manufacturing the product. But as the complexity grows, the owner needs to focus on marketing and hiring and the team and a lot of things that's not completing a weekly cash flow template or model. And so making sure that someone else, whether that's a firm like ours or internal, is done is, I think, critical. And then again, it doesn't really change much once you're a $100 million business. Maybe you're using something like NetSuite and it's a little bit more automated, or there's some other apps that can connect to QuickBooks and pull the data. Even QuickBooks itself has a native spreadsheet sync that's totally acceptable. So yeah, there's not this like mythical evolution. All the basics still apply.
Awesome. Well, maybe we'll do a little plug for Ecom CFO here, but where do you typically come in? Like what's happening in the business? Like you mentioned this already, maybe it's just the founders doing a lot of different things and they need to basically just wear less hats. But are there kind of specific signals or indicators that you hear when you're talking to, let's say, a prospect or a potential client where it's like, hey, like we're going to be a really good fit here? Like what is really happening in that business where they need to start potentially working with a fractional CFO?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different entry points and a lot of different pain points that clients have. I mean, it's such a large spectrum from I don't know how I'm going to make payroll next week. I really need to understand my cash position. Please help me. And then there's the other side of the spectrum of I'm crushing it. I need to focus on growth. We want to 2, 3, 4x ad spend, but I'm not confident enough in my numbers to be able to do that. Like I want to say yes, but I want to more professionalize my finance and accounting department, and then everything in between. I mean, those are the spectrum of entry points, but I think most of it comes down to finance and accounting people don't start e-commerce brands, period. And so there's a lack of confidence or a lack of expertise. And I think the real secret is that a lot of founders just feel insecure about their lack of knowledge in finance and accounting, and they want to bolster their knowledge, clarity, and confidence in their numbers so they can make better decisions and ultimately get to that anti-fragility.
Got it. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So, the next question I have for you, and this is something that's really important for us, a really important question that we like to ask specifically around one metric, but I'll kind of get to that. But for you, what are the key financial metrics that kind of separate brands that scale profitably and from the ones that burn out? Like when you're looking at a company, like what are those metrics you're looking at where it's like, hey, these guys are healthy, they're doing well, they're focused on the right things, versus you go in and look at a brand, it's like, oh my gosh, like we got a mess here, we got to clean up. Like what are those key metrics, KPIs that clients should be looking at from a finance perspective?
Yeah, and I think the metrics question is one of the most important conversations to have because there's so much data. There's too much data, in my opinion. We believe this so much that we published a 50-page benchmark report, and we structured it to include only the P&L benchmarks. So we completely excluded the balance sheet. Doesn't mean it's not important, but we just wanted to focus on the P&L for now. And we distilled it down to, I think, 5 or 6 metrics. But at the end of the day, again, business fundamentals, we're all in business to make a profit, period. And the best companies make more profit and worst companies make less profit. So yes, LTV to CAC, contribution margin from new customers, all of those metrics, critically important. But at the end of the day, how much profit is the business generating over a year? And you can say it in terms of EBITDA. And if you think EBITDA is bullshit, like Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett say, then that's fine. You can use net income or operating profit. We can have a conversation about ad backs and owner salary and blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, how much profit is this business generating? Really, both from a dollars and a percentage perspective. That is indicator number one and the most important metric of all. And then, the double clicks into those are contribution margin. Is my revenue growing? Is it growing more sustainably, or am I, seesawing back and forth? So I think we tend to overcomplicate the metrics and everybody wants the secret, and there's not a lot of secrets.
Well, yeah. So contribution margin is our big number, right? From a paid ads perspective. And the biggest thing that we're focusing on is new customer CAC. Our kind of main, you know, service as an agency is scaling new customers profitably. And so, obviously what's key to that is scaling them at that target CAC based on their contribution margin, right? The challenge that we've had is we'll ask the client, all right, what's your contribution margin on certain products, like especially their hero product, right? And they'll say, oh, I think it's this, but I'm not quite sure. But then, let's be safe. And then can you guys just go hit this number? And it's like a drastically lower number, right? And we kind of run the math, based on other clients we've seen, just what we know about like that specific, let's say, company. And we're like, wow, these CACs are just like pretty unsustainable on Meta and Google. And so what we're always trying to push for is that target CAC that is still sustainable on platforms, but also sustainable for the business. And it's a challenge for us to go work with the client to actually uncover what their true contribution margin is and what that target CAC should be, specifically for a new customer. So are there steps that you recommend for brands to basically, identify this? What are the key things that they typically need to be looking at? One thing I've talked about with you actually before is like, a lot of times marketers will go and be like, all right, what's your ad spend? What's your kind of landed product cost? Okay, great. Well, this is what your target CAC should be. And there's so much missing from that calculation because like technically like, there's like overhead, with the business and other aspects that are just not included in that contribution margin, right? And so, one thing that I think is, you mentioned before is just like first, step one is good bookkeeping. And then I'm sure, there's obviously many more steps to this and other ways to look at this. So like if you could just kind of walk me through like what brands should be doing, how they should be looking at this, what are kind of the first steps to actually identifying what that true contribution margin is?
Yeah. So I want to answer that question around what brands should be doing to get better and a better understanding of those metrics. I think there is a higher level discussion about new customer CAC is a great metric, but I think again, as a business owner, putting that in the context of the entire business, because if new customer CAC is the only metric that I care about, then what about retention? And am I completely ignoring my returning customers? What about channel diversity? If I only care about new customer CAC, and do I care that I'm only acquiring customers through one channel? What about my SKU catalog? What about my merchandising? All these different things may get ignored. So I think it's just understanding what is the right metric for the right person or for the right team or for the right initiative. Contribution margin on its own is not how I would run my business. I'm not going to run my business just on contribution margin. I'm not going to run it just on new customer CAC, even though those are critically important. So I just wanted to say that because I think it's really important. On contribution margin itself, I think I hear founders too often, again, wanting the secret and just tell me what it is and what it should be. And it's more complicated than that, in that you have to define it for yourself. In that there is a general framework of contribution margin generally includes all of the variable selling costs. Now, if a marketing agency, for example, has a percentage of spend component and a retainer component, does the retainer component go in or outside of contribution margin? We can have an hour discussion about it. What matters more is, does the founder know? Has the founder made that definition? So when they're looking at a report, whether it's from their CFO and accounting firm or their marketing agency, that we're comparing apples to apples. And so things like SMS or their Klaviyo or their affiliate commissions, all these different things, I would generally classify in the contribution margin bucket. But again, you could make the argument for whatever reason that they're not for a specific business. So what matters first and foremost is that the owner understands and has created that definition of contribution margin for them, because contribution margin is not, it's not anything required by the IRS. There's no, and if you go pull the 10Ks and annual reports from Yeti and Hims and Hers and the other big public company businesses, you will not see contribution margin listed in there. There is no generally accepted accounting principle that says this is how you calculate contribution margin. Now, there is for net revenue and gross profit, but you really have to define it for yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think the interesting thing you called out there, which is something we also talk about with our clients, is adding our costs, agency costs into that CAC, right? Because the big thing, especially we run on that percentage of ad spend model, I think it creates a great shared incentive where we are heavily incentivized to scale them. However, the key kind of hinge here for it to actually work for the brand is that needs to be calculated into their CAC, because the issue I've seen before with other agencies that run on the percentage of media spend model is basically how can we convince a client to spend more money regardless of the impact to the business, right? And for us, it's like, yeah, we have to go bake that into CAC, so we have that shared incentive because we really want to figure out how to solve the problems that allow them to scale spend, but then also do it in a way that we actually know we're driving good revenue for them and we're not just trying to spend at all costs, right? So I think it's a super important thing for us basically to understand that. And it's always a challenge working with brands to really uncover what that contribution margin is, and well, really more specifically, what their target CAC needs to be. And then your point too around not necessarily focusing on new customer CAC is like the only metric for the business is so important as well. Like this has been a challenge for us too, because we have seen issues with retention with customers, especially if they have a a product that has a likelihood for high repeat purchase rates or subscriptions. And the challenge that we run into is basically we'll go too far down the road optimizing towards acquiring new customers, and we'll get further and further away from customers that are likely to be repeat purchasers. But then also too, they don't have a good retention structure in place. So, those people do become repeat purchasers, or they ultimately like create a subscription, right? So it's really important. I mean, and then I guess just the last point, it's something you spoke about earlier, is being like single channel dependent, and then especially like paid ads dependent is just a horrible way to scale a business for the long term. I've told clients before, it's like, hey, like you need to be doing much better retention marketing. You need to be doing much more kind of organic growth, like SEO, general kind of marketing outside of paid ads, because paid ads is so dangerous. It becomes addicting, right? You just turn on the spigot, revenue comes in, but guess what? You're just renting that space. You're paying for those ads to get delivered every single time. And if anything happens, especially like, let's say one of these platforms like Meta, like it's Q4 jacks up CPMs or anything, other kind of like bugs happen on the platform, the business is in a really bad spot. Like they really need to think about diversifying and then understanding too what that aggregate new customer acquisition cost is across all channels is, and then specifically per channel. And that's something too, where it's like, I think that requires an added level of sophistication, which is really difficult for a lot of brands to actually dig into and figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been, well, in acquiring customers on single channel and not being reliant on paid. I mean, you're doing this with this podcast.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
it's easy for you to turn on Google Ads or Meta to try and acquire customers, but creating content, growing organically, making time for these types of conversations instead of writing ad copy is hard. And it takes a long time. And um, people don't want to do things that are difficult,
Yeah.
but the payoff can be tremendous and actually increases the long-term viability of the business.
Sure. I think the other issue too that I've seen, especially with like organic growth, is it's one of those like long-term compounding plays, right? And so, paid ads is pretty linear. You spend more money, generally you do better. I mean, if you're scaling correctly, these campaigns are optimized, but like organic growth is just flat for a very long period of time, and then it slowly starts growing, then it grows kind of exponentially, provided you do it right as well. But I think it takes so much patience and it's a much longer time horizon to actually see the results. which is why a lot of brands get really frustrated with it. And it's also why we don't do it because we prefer to have like some quick wins and look good, as opposed to being like, this is going to take you 2 years and a lot of work, and then you'll start seeing results. It's too difficult. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that paid ads aren't going anywhere. And, we're seeing different ad platforms starting to emerge. And I think inevitably that is going to drive CPMs down and give brands a better opportunity to diversify. But should it be my only strategy? I mean, we all agree that it's not, or
yep.
it should not be.
Yep. Awesome. So that's all the questions I had for you today. Is there anything else you want to say or highlight? Anything you want to say about Ecom CFO?
I would just encourage, I'm very, very proud of our benchmark report, and I don't think enough people have seen it. Again, it's 50 pages. We recognize this gigantic gap in the market of great benchmark data that's available. I mean, yes, you can go pull the public comps, but it's not the same. And looking at private companies too, there's just not another data source out there like it. I've talked to everybody in the industry and confirmed. And even if you go on to ChatGPT and look for benchmarks, we're one of the very, very few firms that come up with, especially with a report as comprehensive as we put together. So, yeah, I'm just super proud of it, and I hope more people read it and it actually helps them.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll make sure to link it on the content that we post with this. So,
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me, Hal, and see you around WeWork.
yeah, for sure. Thanks for joining.